You're listening to This is Yoga Therapy. I'm your host, Michelle Lawrence, and I've had the opportunity to interview many of those who are making a difference at the intersections of yoga and health. And I'm here to share with you their stories and conversations. Thanks for listening. In today's episode, I interviewed Dinsmore-Tuli. Uma fell in love with yoga and yoga nidra at the age of 4 and has been practicing ever since. She's been teaching since 1994 and training yoga therapists since 1999. An eco-yoga therapist with special expertise in yoga therapy for empowering women's health, she runs retreats internationally, training teachers and yoga therapists in menstrual health, pre- and postnatal yoga, and in yoga for menstrual and menopausal health. In 2011, she co-founded the post-lineage, non-hierarchical Yoga Nidra Network. Uma is the author of Yona Shakti, A Women's Guide to Power and Freedom Through Yoga and Tantra. Her other books include The Celtic School of Yoga and the forthcoming Nidra Shakti, an Encyclopedia of Yoga Nidra. She has trained more than 1,000 teachers in total yoga nidra and yoga for women and has shared more than 1 million total yoga nidra practices in 18 countries. That's impressive, Uma. It's great to meet you and have you here on the podcast today.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Michelle. It's nice to be able to speak with you and everybody listening about yoga therapy.
Yes. Let's get the word out there, right? So let's have you start by sharing a little bit more about yourself, where you're from, and that can be literally as well as the experience that shape who you are. And then also, how did you come to yoga? It seems like you've been at it for quite a while.
It's quite a funny little story. So it's like 1969, 1970. We had a program on Thames TV, which was a local TV program called Yoga for Health with Richard Hittleman. And maybe some of your older listeners might remember Richard Hittleman actually wrote some really very good books about yoga, very comprehensive. And I was fortunate enough to have a mother who was kind of temporarily enthused about this program. So we used to watch it together, and I learned yoga off the TV with Richard Hittleman. And one of my earliest memories is adjusting my mother in Dhanurasana, in the bow pose, by saying, well, look, if you were to feel where you push your foot into your hand, then you'll open up the front of your hips better. Like, I remember that pose, and the fact that if you're 4 years old, most 4-year-olds can do that for fun, you know?
Yeah.
So I remember teaching, and I also had the book that came with the TV series. So other people had comics, or maybe later they had other stuff under their beds to read. And I used to look at this book and practice. I had a little smiley mat that I used to practice on. Everyone had one of those in the 1970s. And I used to practice yoga, and I kind of did some stuff from the book. Then the TV program stopped, and I just carried on doing it. It had a fully comprehensive guide on meditation, yoga philosophy, Sattvic cookery, and I just grew up doing this stuff. So by the time I finally got to yoga classes when I was an undergraduate student in London, I was probably the world's most awful yoga student, because like I'd been doing this all this time, I was going, no, I just do it this way. So it always felt very natural, as if many of these states were naturally arising within a human being, naturally arising states of consciousness. So I think that formed my attitude to yoga, was that it was always there, always accessible, and always part of the cycles of life. You know, I would use it to go to sleep. I would sleep on the floor. I didn't sleep. I did a lot of weird stuff as a kid, but actually I think I felt that was all perfectly natural, because it seemed to be in this yoga book that I had. So yeah.
What a great story. What a great story.
Great story, actually. Yeah. Obviously, my mom never continued doing the yoga. She just did it for a few weeks, but I was completely entranced. And it sort of never went away. And then I was fortunate enough in London, I did a yoga therapy training with the Yoga Biomedical Trust when I was studying for my PhD. I also did a training with Mukunda Stiles, the late Mukunda Stiles, in structural yoga therapy. And that all happened in very fortuitous ways, because I had some really remarkable teachers who had big teachings to show. So it was really, it's good. And then it sort of, the balance shifted. So instead of working in universities and higher education, I was a teacher and a lecturer and a tutor. I ended up writing some books about yoga therapy together with the Yoga Biomedical Trust, then the balance shifted, basically. Yeah.
Where are you from, Uma?
I was born in North London, but really I joke that I grew up in the middle of the Irish Sea because my mother's Irish and my father was English. So we were always going back and forth. So I'm actually Irish and English. I always say the better part of me is Irish. I just happen to have been born in London. But I sound very English. Yeah. Yeah.
So you're an advocate for rest and yoga nidra. So tell us what drew you to this particular path, and can you share with us more about the Yoga Nidra network?
Yeah, it's probably good to define what yoga nidra is, because I'm always amazed that even people who've been doing yoga for a long time don't know. Yoga nidra is a Sanskrit word that means sleep or rest. And yoga nidra is the practice of the yoga of rest. So it usually means there's not any physical movement, but it's a traveling of awareness through states of consciousness that it happens in the place between being awake and asleep. And it's a naturally arising state. Its active ingredient is nidra shakti, i.e. the power, the shakti of rest and sleep. And it's a very ancient practice that has recently been commodified and trademarked by a number of powerful organizations and schools that would lead you to believe that their founders created these practices, but they're actually very ancient indeed. And you can find their roots in the Mahabharata and the Devi Mahatmya. And so I came to this practice a little bit like I came to all yoga. As a child, I discovered these places where you could be. A lot of children find it. It's a naturally arising sort of semi-trance dream state where you be in the zone. I was a very creative child. I wrote a lot and spent a lot of time up trees. And so what I discovered was that when I finally found the practice of yoga nidra in a formal structure, I recognized the state that it reliably brings you into. So there are a lot of methods and schools, but they're all guiding you into what is a naturally arising state of being conscious of the place of physically resting, but being aware, sometimes aware of sleep. And it's a very creative space. It's a very healing space. And what I discover is the reason I'm an advocate for it is that it enables us to access a very profound healing resonance, like a healing energy that empowers the body's self-healing mechanisms to come into play. And that might be psychic healing of trauma. It might be physical healing of pain. I've experienced all of these things and seen it with my clients. So, and as a neurodivergent person, I'm a person with ADHD, and my family has a lot of autism within it. So I understand that for a lot of people who have various kinds of neurodivergence, we need yoga nidra in order to function in a neurotypical world, because it's a very tiring place to be, because most of it doesn't really make a lot of sense. So everybody, I think, benefits from it, but it's particularly beneficial for people who've experienced trauma, which is at this stage possibly most of our species, and also for people navigating the very intense demands of our kind of neurobiological framework, where we actually need that kind of rest. But I find as a daily practice, it's extraordinarily beneficial. So the Yoga Nidra Network is a loose network of international Yoga Nidra teachers, some of whom have trained with us. We have our own training of Total Yoga Nidra, but some of whom are like colleagues and friends from many other approaches. And we offer Yoga Nidra for free in 23 different languages. So you can download them. My vision is for every human on the earth to have access to Yoga Nidra for free in their own mother tongue. So we're slowly working on that. And when you have a non-hierarchical, it's structured in a very organic way, then things take quite a long time to happen. We don't really have a corporate structure or an institute or anything of that kind. We have a network of people whose hearts are all on this web. So you can find all of those to listen to. You can listen in all these different languages.
It's amazing what you've done, and so appreciated. And thank you for sharing that bit of background too, just so that people understand, right? And can access it themselves and know that it is a place that offers deep healing and is accessible to everyone.
Yeah, because it's a horizontal meditation, even people who aren't able to sit up can access this. It's also it's a profound meditative state, but it's an incredible resource for problem solving and for healing and just for rest. A lot of people find it difficult to go to sleep.
Yeah. Sounds like you have a daily yoga nidra practice. We'll talk about your daily practice later, but
Let's talk about
how,
that.
yeah,
I
great.
practice every morning, and I recommend people who don't really understand what yoga nidra is, because they always fall asleep, to practice in the morning, because then you're awake. And I also practice every night, and quite often as we run retreats. I've just come back from London and we held a training course where I might be delivering 6 or 8 yoga nidras every day. Each one is different, unique. We create co-creative yoga nidras for community need. Each one is unique. And then I obviously have a very pleasant job because I need to listen to all of the keys. So sometimes on a retreat, there might be up to 12 practices of yoga nidra every day. And if it was not for that, I would have gone up in smoke a very long time ago.
Yeah. Wow. Amazing. So we're going to shift gears a little bit, but we'll come back and talk, I think, some more about it in a bit. But talk with me about Yoni Shakti and how do you hope to inspire women through these teachings?
Okay, so Yoni Shakti literally means the source. Yoni is the source or the homecoming. It also is a way to describe the female genitalia. I know in England, the word that I use to define and translate that is actually banned on public radio, so you might not be able to use the word cunt. But the word cunt is the only English word we have that actually can translate yoni, because it contains the whole source. And it actually has a deep meaning that relates to the yoga therapy approach for women, which is to connect to the source power. And that source power is the vitality of life that keeps us well, but is also our inner knowing. It is our intuitive wisdom. And the word cunt relates to that. So it means related to cunning and kenning and knowing. And it also relates to gekindle, which is a very old English word meaning to kindle life, like we might say to kindle a fire or to kindle life. So all of these words in the English word relate to yoni as a homecoming place, a source place, and it's a particular energetic space in the body, a yoni sthana, like svadhisthana, or the space of one's own being, is relating to the rhythmic well-being and the rhythmic health of processes like menstruation, looking at menarche, a first bleed, and looking at the processes of menopause and these cycles of life, including birth and lactation and pregnancy loss and aging. And they're all initiations into power, which have been largely medicalized through things like the contraceptive pill and HRT and assisted reproductive technologies. And all these things might be helpful and good, but there is a really source power from which most female humans have been disconnected. And the source of yoga therapy that I offer are rhythmic practices. They're often very circular, spiraling practices in terms of movement, a lot of yoga nidra and a lot of sangha. We do a lot of work in circles of listening to enable the trauma of having these initiations either overlooked or somehow demeaned or disrespected, so that we can actually uncover the life force that has been suppressed and perverted and twisted and constrained in many women's lives through shame, actually. So what we're looking at is promoting well-being and women's vitality through a respect for cyclical knowing. So that means that the yoga therapy is rooted in cyclical wisdom. So if a woman is not conscious of the seasonal emotional shifts with the menstrual cycle, or of the extremely powerful transformative energies of menopause, for example, there are others, or of the power of our sexual awakening and what that might actually mean, we can't recognize that these all move in cycles and circles and actually give us access to life power. It's very hard to stay well. So there's a huge expansion in like suffering, levels of suffering, with things like endometriosis and hideous menopausal experiences and awful birthing experiences and postnatal depression. I mean, it's really very terrible. So what I see is if we share very simple yoga therapy practices that empower, that send love through mudra. I use mudra, yoga nidra, sangha, like the gathering of circles, and a lot of rhythmical practices and deep rest. Restorative yoga is part of it. we actually reconnect to that source power, and it's extraordinarily willing to help us heal. But we need to listen. And in order to listen to the inner wisdom, we have to actually recognize how loud the voices are that want for women to be ashamed of that blood, of that power, of the aging, of what it actually feels like to be giving an empowered birth. These things are becoming rare. So my job is to empower everyone living in female bodies and to connect with those energies as life-giving forces rather than inconveniences that need to be just managed. And unfortunately, most yoga practices do not help women's health and well-being. They're not geared up for women, they're geared up for men. So part of what I did in Yoni Shakti, is a big fat book, was to uncover the secret history of yoga as a practice that's really rooted in the earth and has been commodified and capitalized upon by largely military and male methods of practice. Line everybody up, get them all to do the same thing. These things aren't really yoga therapy. Yoga therapy is often one-to-one or in small groups that are supportive and has rest at the center. I tend to do that first up. Let's rest and listen to what the body says, and then often the body will really call for what's needed. So menstrual cycle awareness and respect for menopause as a natural transition into immense power, they are the kind of cornerstones of that therapy. That was a bit of a long answer, but there's so much. I
love everything you said.
So much suffering, and each stage of my own life, I've been able to provide support for people in the similar stage. So during pregnancy, I was working a lot with pregnancy yoga and birthing. I still work with a lot of midwives and doulas and birth keepers. We are honestly at the fringes of what people in mainstream medicine would see as normal and acceptable, because I actually think that that's where we need to be. We operate at the margins of traditional wisdoms, and there's a lot of great knowing at the intersection of yoga therapy. Really, I see it as it's like a intuitive healing art that intersects with indigenous wisdoms, say from Ayurveda or from Chinese medicine, for example. So, yeah, or from the wisdom of the lands I'm from, there's a lot of great wisdom about empowered feminine archetypes, and they're part of healing too. So dream and dream sharing are all part of the healing, because we're all having the same nightmares. And if we need to connect up, we can face into them. So I use tarot as well, Mother Peace Tarot, a feminist approach to tarot. So in some ways, it's a kind of intersectional feminist healing yoga therapy that's very intuitive. That will probably define it.
Say it one more time. I love that. Intersectionalist, female.
It's an intersectional feminism, which is like really inspired by kind of like liberation theology and Black feminism, and looking at how all our liberations are intertwined. So if one girl or woman is suffering, like, that's not her fault. We're all suffering. We need to hold that space for her to connect and heal. So it's an intersectional, feminist, intuitive approach to yoga therapy. I'm using yoga therapy really as a fairly good umbrella term in which a lot of things can be accessed, that because we have a 5-body model, don't we? The physical body, the energetic model, and then the mental and emotional state. Plus I work a lot with people's psychic and intuitive knowing, which is just there. They just need space to listen. It's what they might hear from their ancestors if they actually had a chance to rest.
I'm getting really excited by everything you're sharing, because it's it's so it's just so up my alley. And I'm surprised that we haven't met until now. And I bet you we know a lot more people in common than we realize. So,
I mean, one of the beautiful things about Yoga Nidra, especially in North America, is how many excellent women's voices have been bringing forward people like Karen Brody and Tracy Stanley and Chanti Tacaronte Perez, who works together with all of these dear sisters, and Jennifer Dumper in California, who's written Liminal Dreaming. All of these people are like, we're a little web. We all know each other. Octavia Rahim's work on rest as well. Like, these are Trisha Hersey at the Nat Ministry, like all of these fine North American women's voices. I have full respect and honor for. We're all on the same kind of mission, I feel, in different ways. Yeah.
I've met Tracy and interviewed her on the podcast before, but I have not met those other women that you mentioned. And Now I'm keen to do so. Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit more about feminine, and specifically, you and I spoke a little bit briefly about this before we started the podcast, but I mentioned to you that I'm a mom of two young daughters. I've got twins. They're 9 years old. And although I work mostly with adults and mostly women as the director of inner peace yoga therapy, the work that I'm doing here in my local community, I live in Colorado right now, is more focused on girls, which just really started in the past year or so as a way to connect them with their source and self, to build community amongst themselves, and to point them to the sacredness that's all around them. We live in this beautiful place, so that nature feels very center to most of us who live here. And I think it was from this lens that I was pointed to you and then drawn to your work. And I would just love your input, since you have so much experience and wisdom to share. But just what are your thoughts on how to best hold space for the girls and young women today?
Well, that all depends. That's my favorite answer to everything.
Oh, yes, that's a
All
good yoga therapy answer, isn't it?
That all depends. How old are these girls, these young women? What?
11 to 13.
Okay. So when you're looking at 11 to 13-year-olds, I'm trying to understand, are they rural girls? That's going to be a whole
Yes.
different thing than living in the big city. So I think there's one kind of common denominator that's useful, but around that age, there is a massive vulnerability and an immense power and strength, and that they're often extremely exhausted. My approach when I'm holding space for girls and women, and it's not something I do regularly these days, but I have done a lot of it in the past, and I would see that exactly what you've observed is at the heart of how we need to hold them. They're tired. Why are they tired? Because school is a crime scene, basically. That's my space on it. It's an abuse of human rights, most of what goes on in most schools, lining everyone up and asking them to ask permission to have a wee, controlling their bodily functions, making them, they're living in a very oppressive regime of school in which they cannot really be themselves, no matter how good the school is. Yeah, I've got a whole set of understandings about school that might be quite radical. But when they're not in those places, they will be tired because they have to spend so much time in those places. So the best thing we can do is to hold a nourishing space for them to rest up first. Get cozy, get comfy, be comfortable with resting in public, maybe 10, 15 minutes, maybe longer. And then when they awaken, we hold a loving space for them to be just how they are. And then their capacity to share who they really are will come out. So I found that a lot of practices that they love are like the elegant practices of mudra. So elegant, they don't have to move very much. They can do mudra, and to be giving them a model of respect for their own bodies, to understand that menstruation, which may or may not have arisen at this point, but it's likely that quite a lot of them may have begun menstruating, or they will be organized by the rhythms of the emotional tides of that menstrual cycle. Even before they get the red blood, they will have the white flow of the fertile mucus that will be coming. And so to empower them to be knowledgeable about this and to ask them what they want to know. That's how I work with groups. Like, what do you want to hear? When you do the yoga nidra, I create nidras for people made out of the words that they tell me. And often when you get groups like that, people are like, I just want peace. I want rest. I want to feel comfortable. I want to feel at ease. I want to dream. So I create a space where first up, they can rest. They can feel comfortable. You can develop a rapport or a relationship of trust where they can ask you what they want to know, rather than us having any arrogance of knowing what it is that we want to tell them. They are so wise. This generation have chosen to be young adults at a time that neither you nor I nor our mothers would be up for that. It's terrifying. They're usually under really powerful forces of fear around what's going to happen to the climate, the planet, their own lives. And so if we can hold it, teach them what it feels like to be held safely in community, they will know how to do that for each other.
Mm-hmm.
So I often begin with rest, and it might be very informal.
Yeah.
And comfort and coziness, and then they can practice lying down. That I don't put any imposition on them. The girls and women's retreats I would do, often the girls would just be snuggled up and listening in, and then they can do the mudras and sharing. I don't know if that's a useful thing, but I feel that yoga therapy has this capacity to be what it's needed for that group of very exhausted young people, just to honor their deep inner wisdom. And often if they share their dreams, you discover they're having very powerful dreams. This is also the dream yoga is very powerful.
That's helpful. Thank you. Yeah.
And also to offer celebration. There's some great colleagues of mine around the world doing celebration days for girls and their mothers for when they get their first bead. But around that 11 to 13, it's almost as if they're in this, that you often see a really dramatic change, don't you? From these feisty little girls who are like, listen to me, this is how it is, to these young women who are totally silenced by the shame and fear of like how it is that you're told you need to be a woman. And they might just like go along with all those images. As a radical intersectional feminist, I've got some critiques about those things, but like for them to find their own way and to know that in your space they can take up space, they can rest, they can be held, and that however they show up, they're welcome. Yeah, that's important. Bless you for doing that work. It's really vital. Yeah.
So last question, and this might get us talking more about your yoga nidra practice again, but maybe more than that too, I would expect. So I ask this at the end of each podcast, and it's really for you to share about your own personal sadhana, because it really is such an important cornerstone of who we are as yoga teachers and yoga therapists in order to show up in whatever circle or in front of whoever is coming to see you. Like the steadiness of your own sadhana is first and foremost. So I love to hear from all the different guests that I interview what their personal practices look like. And I'd love to hear yours as well.
Thank you for asking. It is really important because we cannot pour from empty jugs. And we can only encourage others to light their own light if ours is burning brightly. So my own practice is a seasonally dependent practice. So I feel that unless we honor what's actually arising on our spinning globe, so that the practices change from day to day and from season to season, we're pretending. So my practice in the wintertime, yeah, I live in a place where it gets dark at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and it doesn't get light till 8 in the morning. So in the wintertime, I will make sure that I do my yoga nidra practice in the morning as it's getting light. I endeavor always with that practice to make sure that I'm making space for connection with my ancestors and with the earth on which I'm resting so that I can be a good ancestor. I take guidance from what I hear, from my intuition. I always record my dreams or make space to listen to dream insight. And I have a devotional relationship with the goddess Nidra Shakti, who is the power of sleep. And it's her power that I share. I'm her servant. So that's the morning practice. I'll make sure that I do that. If it's possible, I will also put in a yoga nidra practice in the evening. And I work with their energy, or I'm in service with the energy of breath. So I use mantra, and that's all year round. So, and in the summer, that energy of light will be very different if I'm in my own lands. And so I'll find I will honor more light and energy and power, and I will take much more time outside and I will be in connection. So I usually make ritual offerings to all of the elements in some informal way to do with like a daily connection with that. And the movement practice that I do is usually a form of a complete series for a liberation of energy. And I might not do that every day, depending on the other obligations that I have. So that practice looks like a synthesis of various forms of Pavana Muktasana, which is the movement series that liberates energy through the body. And it's like a combination of the joint freeing series with visualizations and connections, depending on the seasons. So in the summer, it will be welcoming light and sunshine. What other practice? So they're my kind of key practices, that it's like elemental, seasonal, and connected to the power of rest as my keystone. Because if I'm not rested, then everything else it's like pretense, it's not real. It has to come from my rested being. So I also have a very diligent Ayurvedic dinacharya practice. And I feel that there's an Indo-Celtic interface in my own practices. I mean, my family is Irish and Indian, the family that I've created. and that those seasonal observances are very important. So things like Samhain, or you would call it Halloween, and Bealtaina, I will make honorings of those, but they often coincide with things like the Navratri, the 9 nights of the Divine Mother. They're there 4 times a year. So I'm operating all my spiritual practices in relation to the seasonal unfoldings. And that means I, as a therapist, can meet people where they are and also see when they're disconnected. Because how can we tell that people are disconnected from their own cyclical wisdom if we ourselves have some rigid idea that we have to do the same practice every day at the same time? It's ridiculous. Sorry, but it is ridiculous. So sometimes my practice might be at 4 a.m. in the summer, but it might not be like now. It's getting dark here. So I will honor those turnings. So I don't know if that gives you, I mean, so it's a very embodied and seasonal and earthed practice that involves breath and mantra. And I have a relationship with the Mahavidya, who are the wisdom goddesses. And so my sadhana is often connected to those particular energies to support my work in the world. And I'm grateful that I have been given I've been introduced to them through the yoga schools and the family connections that have brought me in relationship to those wisdom goddesses. And my job is to see the interconnections. So that's what my sadhana practice is. It's often at those meeting points, where sunset and sunrise. And yeah, I don't know if that's a good. So it's
it's a beautiful answer, and it totally resonates for me. And I wouldn't expect anything different either.
So yoga nidra,
just based on the little bit that I know about you so far.
Yoga nidra is the key for it, and I would always do that first. And sometimes then the body goes, you need to move. Or sometimes she'll say, no, you don't need to move, or, all kinds of things. And it depends. I just think it depends on listening.
Yeah.
And as a yoga therapist, I think my job is to help people to listen. So my job is to listen to what's unfolding in the cyclical wisdom.
Mm-hmm. Well, I so enjoy speaking with you and meeting you, Uma, and I look forward to our paths crossing again in the future. What a delight to have you here today. And I'll share some links in the show notes, particularly the Yoga Nidra Network and anything else that we mentioned today.
Well, that's really helpful, because then people can access the library. Under resources, there's a library, and there's also a lot of articles and things. And we have a new book coming out that I've been working on for 9 years. And it's called Nidra Shakti, an encyclopedia of Yoga Nidra. So
fabulous.
It's nice. And that you can find the events and things there. I will be back in North America in the summer, so you never know.
Right. Yeah, well, let's stay in touch about that.
At the IAYT conference.
I'll see you there.
I look forward to that, my love.
Yeah, same.
That was nice. Thank you so much for making
Thank you.
Bye-bye, love.
If you'd like to learn more about who we are and what we do, visit us at innerpeaceyogatherapy.com.